going with the idea of the Bills have to take a cornerback at the top of the draft, it just sent me spiraling on just how we view the draft as fans versus how the team views it versus what the reality is, I guess. And the first thing that came to my mind is it's easy to do. I do it myself. As fans, it's easy to get locked into that first round and to a lesser extent, the first 3 rounds. It's where we historically see impact players coming into teams. It's where the fun is. It's where the sexy picks are. That being said, GMs don't plan their organizations around the first 3 rounds like we do, especially when you have a guy like Brandon Beane who's hit on players that have become impact players on this team in the later rounds. So I was wrestling with this idea that the Bills have to take a cornerback at the top of the draft. And that conversation continued to maybe they even double dip in the first 2 rounds and take a cornerback at 30. And with the second pick, maybe somebody, the name here that came up was Savon Revel. And it was like, he might miss some time in his rookie year, but you could get him a little devalued and have your cornerback room set up for the next 10 years. And I think that's a fun idea on paper. It concerns me I think the biggest need on this team is defensive line help. So concerns me that we're waiting that long to address it, but just want to unpack the idea of cornerback early, and not just early, maybe first 2 picks. And if I'm looking at this in trying to be at least in some way predictive, I might even be surprised if the Bills take cornerback in the first round. When we're looking at this idea that the Bills need to take cornerback, it's a different story for me if you didn't have Benford on the roster. If you were legitimately in a position where you had to go find CB1 that will likely be starting week 1. And the reason I see this so much differently than I think a lot of people out there may be seeing it is just over the tenure of Beane and McDermott, we haven't seen a ton of investment in cornerback early. And I know the obvious name that comes up was Kaiir Elam. Yep, that one happened. I would also put the caveat on that you had aging players. You probably intended for him to end up being your CB1 and maybe reset contracts. In this scenario, we have Christian Benford on the roster. Currently, he's extension eligible. We haven't seen that happen yet. But assuming they get him locked up, dude is legitimately a top 10 cornerback in this league. And you're looking for the cornerback to start opposite him. And in the history of Beane and McDermott with the Bills, they haven't put a huge priority on this position. They've had a lot of success having just insert guys, veterans, signing vet minimums, just undrafted free agents. They've had a ton of success without really investing in the cornerback 2 position. And that's not to say that I think Dane Jackson is going to be the week 1 starter because they added him. I'm also not saying that Dane Jackson won't be the week 1 starter. I wouldn't be all that surprised. But when we look at the CB2 position since Beane has come to the Bills, you think about guys like we had Phillip Gaines, EJ Gaines, Josh Norman, Dane Jackson, Levi Wallace. Keep the list going. Kevin Seymour. There's been all kinds of dudes that have come in to this CB2 spot and played adequately, and they've been frustrating at times. But for the production that they've been able to get out of these players with very little investment made there, it's just the blueprint of what they've done. Now, does that mean that they can't change and go into this draft and be like, you know what? We want to go get a dude. We're going to lock up Benford, get him a 4-year deal. We're going to have this guy on a rookie contract, cost controlled 4 years, and we're just going to have 2 dudes out there. And to a further extent, maybe even the double dip of taking a guy in the first and the second and increase your chances of finding a dude and not having to worry about that for 5 years. Things change. We've seen the Bills defense be pretty much the weak link when the Bills end up making their playoff exit. So maybe it is a situation where they do something like that and they want to double dip and just not have to worry about that for 5 years. For my opinion, I just don't see that as the case. And like I said at the top of the show, I would be even a little bit shocked to even see them take cornerback in the first round. I just think that how much we hear McDermott and Beane talk about the game still being won in the trenches and their postseason pressers talking about not having gotten enough from the D line and needing much more there. And when I think about the playoff losses, yes, there's some coverage on the back end that comes up. And obviously, the one fresh in our minds is against the Chiefs. Kyrie Elam struggling to stay on his feet. That was a coverage game. But what has happened more than that, in my opinion, is we get to the playoffs and we're facing these elite quarterbacks. And I think about games against Mahomes and Burrow and just the games that we're not able to get after the quarterback at all. And you can play zone, you can play man. You give Mahomes time to throw, he's going to find somebody open. It's the same way that we talk about Allen for the Chiefs. If you want to argue if he's number one, number two, number three, whatever, a top three quarterback in the league, and you have to be able to get after them. And what did we see in the Super Bowl with the Eagles? They're able to roll all of these defensive linemen out there. They're staying fresh. They're collapsing the pocket. And all of a sudden you get pressure in your face. And it doesn't really matter how good Patrick Mahomes is at throwing the ball if he's got no time to get it out. And just fresh off of our loss to the Chiefs, watching what the Eagles were able to do to them, hearing the messaging from Beane and McDermott at the end of the season, I would just be absolutely shocked to see them do something different than defensive line in the first round.